Welcome to Geopolitics Digest for Tuesday, July 2nd, 2024. Here's today's lineup. Alex Christophorou, then the Duran's commentary on the debate debacle, then Glen Greenwald's report on Biden's cognitive impairment, then Kim Iverson's take on Biden's cognitive impairment, then Danny Haiphong's alarming warning on China's red lines, then Dialogue Works interviews with Jaques Baud, Larry Wilkerson, and Richard Wolff. Then Glen Greenwald's report on updates on January 6th. Then Judging Freedom's interviews with Scott Ritter, Matt Ho, Pepe Escobar, Jaques Freedom, and Karen Kawiatoski. Then Katie Halpers' interview with Jody McIntyre. Then Kim Iverson's report on the two recent SCOTUS rulings. And lastly, Brian Berletics' report on Ukraine's manpower problem. All right, let's go to Alex Christophorou's daily report. One of the central themes in Christophorou's report is the diplomatic activities within the European Union, particularly highlighted by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's visit to Kiev. As Hungary took the rotating presidency of the EU Council, Orban's decision to engage with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky was portrayed as a significant move aimed at fostering negotiations between Ukraine and Russia. Christophorou suggests that this trip underscores Hungary's unique position within the EU, advocating for peaceful resolution to the ongoing conflict in Ukraine. Orban's visit to Kiev and his attempts to mediate between Ukraine and Russia demonstrates Hungary's strategic diplomatic approach. This move is seen as a potential step towards de-escalating tensions, although Christophorou notes that the broader solution to the conflict may lie with Western powers, particularly the United States, than with direct negotiations between the involved parties. Christophorou's report delves into the political climate in the United States, focusing on President Joe Biden's administration. He discusses the challenges faced by Biden, especially in light of a public perception and media scrutiny following his debate last week. The report highlights the debate within the Democratic establishment regarding Biden's capability to lead, suggesting that despite criticism, there is a consensus to support his candidacy for the upcoming election due to the complexities involved in replacing a sitting president. The analysis extends to the broader implications of Biden's leadership on domestic and foreign policies. Christophorou points out that Biden's administration is marked by significant achievements in economic and foreign policy domains, despite the occasional gaffe. This nuanced view challenges the simplified narratives often propagated in the media, using a more comprehensive assessment of Biden's presidency. Another crucial aspect of the report is the exploration of geopolitical tensions, particularly involving the United States, Russia, and China. Christophorou discusses the multifaceted nature of these tensions, which include economic sanctions, trade wars, and potential military conflicts. The report emphasizes the precariousness of the current global situation, where multiple conflicts and rivalries intersect and create a volatile international environment. In this context, Christophorou highlights the strategic alliances and oppositions that are shaping global politics. The report examines the roles of various international actors and their strategies to navigate the complex web of alliances and enmities. This section of the report underscores the importance of diplomatic acumen and strategic foresight in mitigating risks associated with these geopolitical tensions. The role of media in shaping public perception and political discourse is another significant theme. In Christophorou's report, he analyzes how media narratives influence public opinion and the political landscape, often simplifying complex issues into digestible sound bites that may not capture the full picture. This critique is particularly relevant in the context of Biden's administration, where media portrayals can significantly impact the president's public image, consequently his political capital. Christophorou argues for a more critical engagement with media reports and encourages readers to seek a deeper understanding of the issues at hand. This approach advocates for informed citizenship, where individuals critically evaluate media narratives and seek out comprehensive analysis to form their opinions. Now let's go on over to the Duran's report on the presidential debate last week. This provides a critical analysis of the aftermath of the debate between President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump. This debate has sparked significant controversy and uncertainty within the political landscape of the United States, particularly within the Democratic Party. The report delves into the implications of Biden's performance, the reactions from various political factions, and the potential consequences for upcoming election. The debate, which took place last Thursday left a lasting impact on the political scene. According to the Duran, there has been a notable outcry from donors, mainstream media, and prominent Democrats, all expressing concerns about Biden's capability to continue as a candidate. This outcry extends to some Republicans, including the Speaker of the House, who are also calling on for Biden to step aside. The report highlights the internal conflict within the Biden camp, with close associates like his wife and former President Obama allegedly supporting his continuation in the race. One of the critical points raised in the report is the legal and financial implications associated with replacing Biden as a candidate. It is mentioned that substantial amounts of money have been raised for Biden's campaign, and transferring these funds to a new candidate, even to Vice President Kamala Harris, would be challenging. Legal constraints and the logistics of such a transfer create significant hurdles, making the situation even more complex. The Duran emphasizes the Democrats' dilemma, tracing it back to their denial of Biden's issues from the previous year. The report criticizes the party for not addressing the quote-unquote Biden problem earlier, which has now culminated in a crisis. The debate exposed Biden's weakness in the starkest manner, leading even supportive media outlets like the New York Times to suggest that Biden might be better off standing down. The report argues that the Democrats are now panicking and face a difficult decision with no easy solutions. Several scenarios are explored in the report regarding Biden's potential replacement. One suggestion is that Biden could announce his intention to step down in January 2025, handing over the reins to Kamala Harris. However, this raises further questions about the voters' perception and the practicalities of such a transition. The Duran argues that this approach is far-fetched and would confuse voters, leading to further complications. The report suggests that the most realistic scenario might be for the Democrats to stick with Biden despite recognizing his weaknesses. The reasoning is that changing candidates at this stage would create more problems than it solves. The Democrats may choose to circle the wagons around Biden, hoping for the best outcome in the election while preparing for a potential transition to Harris post-election. The report also touches on the geopolitical implications of a weakened Biden administration. With ongoing conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East, the uncertainty surrounding the U.S. presidency could lead to dangerous decision-making. The Duran highlights concerns about the influence of non-elected advisors and the potential for rash decisions that could exacerbate internal tensions. The Biden debacle, as the Duran calls it, presents a sobering analysis of the current political crisis facing the Democratic Party in the United States. It underscores the complexities of replacing a sitting president amid an election cycle, the internal divisions within the Democratic Party, and the broader implications for U.S. foreign policy. As the report concludes, this situation is fraught with uncertainty, and decisions made in the coming months will have profound consequences for the future of American politics and global stability. Now let's go to Glen Greenwald's report on Biden's cognitive impairment. Greenwald's primary argument is that Joe Biden is suffering from significant cognitive impairment, a condition that has been evident in various public performances, most notably in his recent debate. Greenwald underscores that Biden's performance was unprecedentedly poor, comparing it unfavorably to any past political debacles. He emphasizes moments where Biden appeared confused, lost, and unable to complete coherent sentences. These instances, Greenwald suggests, are not merely gaffes, but indicative of a deeper and more concerning cognitive decline. A significant portion of Greenwald's critique is directed at the mainstream media's portrayal and defense of Biden. He accuses major media outlets of actively downplaying or outright denying Biden's cognitive issues. According to Greenwald, the media has been complicit in shielding Biden from scrutiny, often attributing his mistakes to benign causes like fatigue or minor health issues such as a cold. Greenwald argues that this protective stance not only misleads the public but also prevents a necessary and honest discussion about the president's ability to perform his duties. Greenwald backs his claim with polling data, highlighting that a substantial portion of the American public, including Democrats, Independents, and Republicans, believe that Biden is not mentally fit for the presidency. He asserts that this widespread belief is grounded in personal experience, as many Americans have witnessed cognitive decline in elderly relatives. This shared experience makes the public more adept at recognizing similar signs in Biden, regardless of the media's narrative. The implications of Greenwald's analysis are profound. If Biden is indeed experiencing significant cognitive decline, it raises questions about his ability to effectively govern and make critical decisions. Furthermore, Greenwald suggests that the media's reluctance to address these issues could have severe consequences for democratic transparency and accountability. The potential manipulation and selective reporting by the media, as alleged by Greenwald, might undermine public trust in journalism and erode the democratic process. Greenwald vividly recounts specific moments in Biden's debate, such as his confusion over discussion about golf handicaps with Trump and his apparent difficulty in formulating responses mid-sentences. These instances are used to illustrate the severity of Biden's cognitive challenges. Greenwald also mocks a sudden media narrative that Biden had a cold during the debate, suggesting that it was a last-ditch effort to rationalize his poor performance. Greenwald notes that the reactions from various political figures and media personalities who have previously defended Biden's cognitive health. He points out the contradiction between their earlier reassurances and their current concerns following Biden's recent debate performance. This shift, Greenwald argues, exposes a broader issue of credibility and accountability among Biden's defenders. Greenwald's report is a thought-provoking and controversial examination of Joe Biden's cognitive state and the media's role in shaping public perception. Greenwald argument challenges readers to consider the implications of having a president who may be struggling with cognitive decline and the media's potential complicity in hiding this fact. Whether one agrees with Greenwald's conclusions or not, his report raises important questions about leadership, transparency, and the role of media in a democratic society. Now let's go into Kim Iverson's report over the same issue. Iverson begins by describing the Biden family meeting at Camp David, which included Jill Biden, his wife, Hunter Biden, his son, and their grandchildren. Initially planned as a family get-together, the meeting turned into a strategic discussion about President Biden's future amidst growing calls for Democrats for his resignation. Despite concerns about his health and mental acuity, the family decided to support his continued candidacy. Iverson speculates on the reasons behind this decision, suggesting that Jill Biden enjoys the perks of being the First Lady, while Hunter Biden benefits financially and legally from his father's position. She criticizes this decision as neglectful of Biden's well-being and the country's best interest, labeling it as abusive. Her report also touches on the broader political and media landscape. Iverson argues that the liberal media has shielded Biden from scrutiny regarding his mental health, only to turn against him in a coordinated effort to push him out of office. She describes this as a staged coup by the Democratic Party aimed at replacing Biden with a more viable candidate. Iverson highlights the role of key figures like Barack Obama, who publicly supports Biden but allegedly expresses doubts about his viability in private. She also mentions potential successors like Gretchen Whitmer and Kamala Harris, suggesting that the Democratic Party is preparing for an open convention to select a new candidate. A significant portion of Iverson's report is dedicated to criticizing the Democratic Party's approach to democracy. She argues that the party has consistently undermined democratic processes by manipulating primaries and shielding Biden from legitimate competition. Iverson contends that this behavior reflects a broader disdain for voters and a preference for elite decision-making. She also discusses the potential consequences of Biden's continued candidacy, including the possibility of invoking the 25th Amendment to remove him from office. Iverson warns that this could lead to further instability and questions about who is truly running the country. Kim Iverson's report provides a critical analysis of the Biden's family recent meeting and the broader political dynamics within the Democratic Party by highlighting the motivations behind the decision to support Biden's continued candidacy and the potential implications for democracy. Iverson raises important questions about the future of American politics. Her report underscores the need for transparency, accountability, and genuine democratic processes in the selection of political leaders. Now let's go on to Danny Haiphong's report on China's red lines. The geopolitical landscape of the 21st century is increasingly defined by the rivalry between the United States and China. Danny Haiphong's report provides a comprehensive analysis of the current state of affairs, particularly focusing on Taiwan. This report explores the key arguments presented in the report, examining the implications of U.S. policies and the potential for conflict in the Asia-Pacific region. Haiphong begins by discussing the continuous provocations by the United States towards China, with Taiwan being the central issue. Despite being entangled in conflicts in the Middle East and in Ukraine, the U.S. has consistently prioritized the Pacific theater. This is evident from President Joe Biden's statement and action, which suggest a readiness to defend Taiwan militarily if necessary. The report highlights a particularly confusing interview given by President Biden to Time magazine, where he struggled to articulate a clear policy on Taiwan. Biden's statements indicate that the U.S. might use military force to defend Taiwan, but the specifics were left ambiguous. This ambiguity, Haiphong argues, reflects a broader uncertainty in U.S. foreign policy towards China. A significant portion of his report is dedicated to the U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. The recent approval of $300 million AIM arms package, including parts for F-16 fighter jets, underscores the U.S.'s commitment to strengthening Taiwan's military capabilities. However, Haiphong points out that these sales are not just about defense. They are also driven by the interest of U.S. arms manufacturers and war profiteers. Taiwan's strategic importance to the U.S. extends beyond military considerations. Its semiconductor industry is crucial to global technology supply chains, and the island serves as a potential base for U.S. military operations in the region. Haiphong argues that the U.S. sees Taiwan as an unsinkable aircraft carrier from which it can project power towards China. Despite the aggressive posturing, Haiphong suggests that the U.S. is not fully prepared for a conflict with China. The backlog in arms deliveries to Taiwan, and the logistical challenges of deploying forces in the region indicate significant gaps in U.S. military readiness. In contrast, China has demonstrated its preparedness through extensive military drills and exercises. The presence of U.S. special forces in Taiwan training local troops is another critical point raised in the report. This direct involvement of U.S. military personnel on the ground near China's coast is seen as a provocative act that crosses China's red lines. Haiphong warns that such actions could escalate tensions further and lead to a broader conflict. Haiphong's report also touches on the broader implications of the U.S.-China rivalry. The conflict over Taiwan is not just about the island itself, but is part of a larger strategy to contain China's rise. The U.S. aims to undermine China's influence globally and maintain its own primacy in international affairs. This strategy involves not only military actions, but also economic and diplomatic efforts to isolate China. Danny Haiphong's China's Red Lines provides a sobering analysis of the current state of the U.S.-China relations. The report highlights the dangers of the U.S.'s provocative actions towards Taiwan and the potential for a significant conflict in the Asia-Pacific region. As tensions continue to rise, it is crucial for policymakers to consider the long-term implications of their actions and seek ways to de-escalate the situation. Now let's go on to Dialogue Works interviews. Let's start out first with the interview with Jaques Baud. Baud begins by discussing the recent snap legislative elections in France, highlighting the emergence of three major parties: the National Rally, the New Popular Front, and the Presidential Party Ensemble. Each of these parties represents a different segment of the French political spectrum, from the far right to the far left, and their performances in the elections reflects the diverse political sentiments among the French populace. Traditionally, or far-right party, the RN has undergone significant transformations under the leadership of Marine Le Pen. Baud notes that while the party retains its nationalist roots, it has also attracted disillusioned former communists, making it a party of the disgruntled rather than the purely right-wing. Despite its controversial past, the RN has managed to position itself as a legitimate opposition force, garnering around 35% of the vote. This coalition of left-wing parties, the New Popular Front, led by Jean-Luc Mélenchon, represents the traditional leftist values of workers' rights and anti-capitalism. Baud points out that the NUPES has maintained a critical stance on issues like Palestine, reflecting its commitment to international solidarity. The coalition secured approximately 30% of the vote, indicating substantial support for its progressive agenda. The party of President Emmanuel Macron, Ensemble, received about 22% of the vote. Baud criticizes the party for its lack of clear policy direction, describing it as more of a marketing entity than a political force. The party's decline in popularity is attributed to its amateurish handling of both domestic and foreign policy issues. Baud delves into the potential foreign policy shifts depending on which party gains power. He suggests that if the RN were to win, there would likely be minimal changes in France's stance towards Russia and Ukraine. Despite its nationalistic rhetoric, the RN has aligned its foreign policy views closely with those of the current presidential party to attract broader support. In contrast, victories of the NUPES could lead to significant changes, particularly in relations to Palestine. Baud highlights that the NUPES is likely to adopt a more pro-Palestine stance, reflecting its leftist ideology and the demographic realities of France's substantial Muslim population. However, on the issue of Ukraine, the NUPES might pursue a more balanced approach, advocating for peace rather than taking a hardline stance against Russia. On domestic front, Baud emphasizes the economic constraints facing any new government. France's high debt levels limit the scope for ambitious policy initiatives, forcing parties to remain vague about their plans during the campaign. He also notes that the potential for social unrest, particularly if the RN's Jordan Bardella, a young and inexperienced politician, were to become prime minister. Jaques Baud's interview with Dialogue Works offers a nuanced perspective on the complexities of French politics. His analysis underscores the fluidity of political alliances and the challenges of governance in a polarized society. As France navigates its political future, the insights from this interview provide valuable context for understanding the potential directions of both the domestic and international policies in France. Now let's go to Larry Wilkerson, the interview with Larry Wilkerson. Wilkerson begins by addressing the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, highlighting the complexities and contradictions in Western responses. He notes that the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has shown interest in peace talks, yet there are conflicting signals from NATO and Western countries regarding their support and strategy. Wilkerson criticizes the lack of a coherent strategy from the U.S., describing it as insane and convoluted, making it difficult for adversaries and allies alike to understand American intentions. He suggests that both Zelensky and the Western leaders are weary of the conflict and may be seeking a way to end it. However, domestic political issues, particularly in the U.S., complicate these efforts. Wilkerson's analysis implies that a resolution to the conflict requires a clear and consistent strategy, which is currently lacking. A significant portion of the interview is dedicated to critiquing U.S. foreign policy. Wilkerson argued that the U.S. lacks a long-term strategic vision, operating instead on a day-to-day basis without coherent policies. He points out to the inconsistency in U.S. actions, such as the pivot to China while being heavily involved militarily in the Middle East and Ukraine. This lack of strategy, according to Wilkerson, leads to confusion and unpredictability in international relations. He also touches on the historical context, recalling the conversation with Colin Powell about the end of the Cold War and the missed opportunities for more stable and cooperative relationship with Russia. Wilkerson believes that the current adversarial stance towards Russia, which he traces back to the Clinton administration, has been detrimental to global stability. Wilkerson is critical of NATO's role in global security, suggesting that it has become a force for instability rather than stability. He argues that NATO's expansion and involvement in conflicts outside its traditional sphere, such as Afghanistan and Libya, have contributed to global chaos. Wilkerson calls for a re-evaluation of NATO's purpose and strategies, advocating for a more cooperative approach to international security. He also highlights the economic and political consequences of the Ukraine conflict for Europe, suggesting that some U.S. interests may have intentionally exacerbated these issues to weaken European economic power. This perspective underscores the complex interplay between economic interests and geopolitical strategies. The interview also delves into the domestic political landscape in the U.S., particularly the implications of the upcoming elections. Wilkerson expresses concern over the potential return of Donald Trump to the presidency, fearing that his administration would further destabilize both domestic and international affairs. He criticized the current Democratic leadership for its lack of effective leadership and strategic vision, which he believes is contributing to overall chaos. Larry Wilkerson's recent interview provides a sobering analysis of current geopolitical issues and U.S. foreign policy. His critique of the lack of coherent strategy and the resulting global instability highlights the urgent need for a more thoughtful and consistent approach to international relations. Wilkerson's insights call for a re-evaluation of current policies and a renewed focus on diplomacy and cooperation to address the complex challenges facing the world today. Now let's go on to the interview with Richard Wolff. Wolff begins by addressing the sentiments expressed by Fareed Zakaria on CNN, who suggests that global tides are turning against autocracy. Wolff, however, views this optimism with skepticism. He argues that both Zakaria and President Biden are clinging to outdated political ideologies that are no longer effective. According to Wolff, the political ideas that have dominated their last few decades are in decline, leading to a sense of depression among their proponents. Wolff elaborates on this by pointing out to the recent election results in France, where President Emmanuel Macron, a centrist and pro-capitalist leader, was overwhelmingly rejected by voters. Macron received just over 20% of the vote, indicating that 4 out of 5 French voters did not support him. This, according to Wolff, is a clear indication of the Republic's dissatisfaction with the status quo and a rejection of the traditional political ideologies that Macron represents. A significant portion of Wolff's critique focuses on the economic realities faced by the masses. He argues that the economic situation in the Western democracies is deteriorating, with increasing taxes and reduced services. This economic decline is a major factor behind the growing disillusionment with traditional political systems. Wolff cites the examples of the Yellow Vests movement in France, which was a response to Macron's attempt to impose fuel tax to improve the environmental situation. The public's reaction was one of resistance, as they felt the economic burden was too great. Wolff also highlights the broader economic struggles in Western democracies, where the majority of the people are facing declining living standards. He points out that in the United States, large corporations operate in an autocratic manner, with CEOs wielding significant power over employees. This economic autocracy, Wolff argues, undermines the democratic ideals that these nations claim to uphold. This disconnect between the political rhetoric of democracy and the economic reality of autocracy is a significant source of disillusionment for the masses. Wolff challenges the conventional narrative of autocracy versus democracy. He points out that many so-called democratic nations exhibit autocratic tendencies, particularly in their economic structures. For instance, large corporations in the United States operate in an autocratic manner, the CEOs wielding significant power over employees. This economic autocracy, Wolff argues, undermines the democratic ideals that these nations claim to uphold. Wolff further argues that the focus on the dichotomy between autocracy and democracy is a distraction from the real issues. He criticizes commentators like Zakaria for framing the debate in ideological terms rather than addressing the economic realities faced by the masses. According to Wolff, the emphasis should be on improving the economic conditions of the majority rather than perpetuating ideological battles that do not address the root cause of discontent. One of the most compelling arguments presented by Wolff is the rise of alternative economic models, particularly in China. He notes that China's hybrid economic system, which combines government-owned enterprise with a private enterprise, has proven to be highly effective. This model, managed by a development-focused Communist Party, has enabled China to achieve rapid economic growth and global prestige. Wolff suggests that this success challenges the traditional Western economic model and forces a re-evaluation of what constitutes an effective economic system. Wolff contrasts China's approach with that of Western democracies, where the economic policies are often influenced by corporate interests. He argues that China's ability to focus on long-term development goals rather than on short-term profits has been a key factor to its success. This has allowed China to invest heavily in infrastructure, technology, and education, which has in turn driven economic growth and improved living standards for its population. Wolff also addresses the role of ideology in shaping economic perceptions. He criticizes the tendency of Western commentators to frame economic debates in terms of political ideology, such as democracy versus autocracy. This ideological framing, according to Wolff, obscures the real economic issues faced by the masses. He argues that the focus should be on addressing the economic realities rather than on perpetuating ideological battles. Wolff points out that the ideological framing of economic debates often serves to distract from the failure of the current economic system. By focusing on the supposed virtues of the democracy and the evils of autocracy, commentators can avoid addressing the systemic issues that are causing economic hardships for the majority. Wolff calls for a more honest and a pragmatic approach to economic policy, one that prioritizes the needs of the masses over ideological purity. Richard Wolff's interview provides a thought-provoking analysis to the current political and economic landscape. His critique of traditional political ideologies, emphasis on economic realities, and recognition of alternative economic models offer valuable insights into the challenges and opportunities facing the global community. As the world continues to grapple with economic and political uncertainties, Wolf's perspectives encourage a reevaluation of long-held beliefs and a search for more effective solutions. Okay, now let's go into Glen Greenwald's reporting on updates on the January 6th court cases. Greenwald begins by highlighting the significant role of the Supreme Court in shaping the legal landscape post-January 6th. He notes that the court has been active in reviewing cases related to the riot, including decisions that impact the Biden administration, and the interpretation of the Chevron doctrine. However, the most pertinent ruling discussed by Glen Greenwald is the court's rejection of the prosecutorial use of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act to charge January 6th defendants with felonies. The Sarbanes-Oxley Act, originally enacted to address corporate fraud in the wake of Enron scandal, includes provisions for obstructing official proceedings. Prosecutors applied this law to January 6 defendants, arguing that their actions obstructed the certification of the 2020 election results. Greenwald criticizes this application as a distortion of the law's intent, designed to target political protesters rather than corporate criminals. A central theme in Greenwald's report is the concept of prosecutorial overreach. He argues that federal prosecutors, under immense political pressure, stretched the interpretation of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act to secure felony convictions against nonviolent January 6th protesters. This strategy, according to Greenwald, was a deliberate attempt to impose harsh penalties on individuals based on their political beliefs rather than their actions. Greenwald also condemns the judiciary for its initial compliance with these prosecutorial tactics. He asserts that many lower court judges were too fearful of political backlash to rule against the government, resulting in numerous convictions based upon dubious legal grounds. This judicial cowardice, as Greenwald describes it, undermines the principles of justice and fairness, particularly when applied to politically charged cases. The Supreme Court's decision to reject the use of the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in prosecuting January 6 defendants marks a significant turning point. Greenwald details the court's reasoning, emphasizing the technical nature of the ruling. The majority opinion, authored by Chief Justice Roberts, clarified that the law could not be expansively interpreted to include the actions of January 6th protesters. This decision effectively invalidates many of the felony charges brought against nonviolent participants. Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson's concurrence is particularly noteworthy. Greenwald praises her for adhering to her principles of judicial restraint and fairness, even when ruling in favor of defendants whose actions she personally condemns. Jackson's opinion underscores the importance of applying the law as written without allowing political emotions to influence judicial decisions. Greenwald's report also explores the broader implications of the Supreme Court's ruling. He suggests that this decision will have a profound impact on ongoing and future prosecutions related to January 6th. Many defendants may have their convictions overturned or sentences reduced, and the government's ability to use the Sarbanes-Oxley Act in similar contexts will be severely limited. Moreover, the ruling complicates the prosecution of high-profile figures like former President Donald Trump. Special counsel Jack Smith's case against Trump, which partially relies on the same legal theory, now faces significant hurdles. Greenwald argues that this outcome highlights the dangers of prosecutorial overreach and the necessity of adhering to clear legal standards. Greenwald concludes by reflecting on the broader issues of political and legal accountability. He criticizes the selective application of justice, where political enemies are targeted with aggressive prosecutorial tactics, while allies are treated more leniently. This double standard, according to Greenwald, erodes public trust in the legal system and undermines the rule of law. He calls for a more principled approach to justice, one that prioritizes fairness and consistency over political expediency. Greenwald's report serves as a reminder of the importance of judicial independence and the need to protect civil liberties, even in the face of politically charged events. Greenwald's report on the January 6th Capitol riot offers a compelling critique of the legal and political responses to the event. His analysis of the Supreme Court's ruling, prosecutorial overreach, and their broader implications for justice and accountability provides a valuable insight into the challenges facing the American legal system. As the nation continues to grapple in the aftermath of January 6th, Greenwald's perspective underscores the need for a fair and principled approach to justice. Now let's go into Judging Freedom's interviews for today. Let's start with Judge Napolitano's interview with Scott Ritter. Ritter begins by addressing the recent attack on Russian beach, which resulted in civilian casualties, including children. He asserts that the United States played a crucial role in this attack by providing Ukraine with the necessary intelligence and weaponry. According to Ritter, the complexity of the guidance and control system of these weapons necessitates direct involvement from American, British, and NATO intelligence services. This involvement, he argues, makes the United States complicit in the attack, a point that has significantly altered the Russian political approach to the conflict. Ritter emphasizes that the United States authorized Ukraine to use American weapons to strike Russian targets. He explains that the intelligence required to operate these advanced weapons systems cannot be inputted without the technical assistance of Western allies. This direct involvement, according to Ritter, means that the United States effectively attacked Russia, a perspective that has profound implications for the geopolitical landscape. Despite the tragic loss of civilian lives, Ritter emphasizes that Russia's military preparedness remains unaffected. He describes Russia as a mature nation-state that understands the realities of war and is prepared to absorb casualties. Ritter highlights that Russia's strategy involves a war of attrition, where the ratio of Ukrainian to Russian casualties is significantly skewed in Russia's favor. This approach, he suggests, is designed to weaken Ukraine and its NATO allies over time. Ritter points out that Russia is fully engaged in this conflict within the limitations set by their political objectives, which fall short of full-scale war. He notes that Russia is prepared to wage war of attrition, assuming that they will suffer losses as well. According to Ritter, the current casualty ratio is 5 Ukrainians for every 1 Russian, a statistic that underscores Russia's strategic advantage in this prolonged conflict. The interview also touches on the political ramifications of the conflict. Ritter notes that the attack on the Russian beach has led to a significant escalation in tensions between Russia and the United States. He mentioned that the Russian Foreign Ministry summoned the American ambassador to express their outrage and that Russia is now considering retaliatory measures. This includes the potential deployment of short-range and intermediate-range missiles armed with nuclear warheads, a move that would significantly escalate the conflict. Ritter explains that the Russian response to the attack has been swift and decisive. The summoning of the American ambassador and the subsequent diplomatic fallout indicate a severe deterioration in U.S.-Russia relations. He warns that Russia's consideration of deploying nuclear-armed missiles is a direct consequence of the perceived American aggression, highlighting the dangerous escalation potential of the conflict. Ritter provides a broader geopolitical context by discussing the historical and strategic significance of treaties like the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. He criticizes the Trump administration for withdrawing from the treaty and the Biden administration for exacerbating the situation by placing them in Europe and in Asia. According to Ritter, these actions have undone decades of work aimed at reducing the threat of nuclear conflict between the United States and Russia. Ritter elaborates on the importance of the INF Treaty, which was designed to eliminate an entire category of nuclear weapons and reduce the risk of nuclear war. He argues that the withdrawal from the treaty has led to a new arms race, with both the United States and Russia now considering the deployment of intermediate-range missiles. This development, Ritter suggests, has significantly increased the risk of a nuclear confrontation in Europe. Looking ahead, Ritter is skeptical about the prospects for a negotiated settlement. He argues that the current Ukrainian government, heavily influenced by the United States and Great Britain, lacks the sovereignty to negotiate independently. He suggests that any meaningful negotiation would require a change in the Ukrainian leadership and a shift in the geopolitical dynamics. Ritter asserts that the influence of Western powers over the Ukrainian government has undermined its ability to negotiate a peace settlement. He believes that a change in leadership is necessary for any genuine negotiations to take place. Ritter also highlights the broader geopolitical dynamics, suggesting that a shift in the balance of power could create the conditions for a negotiated settlement. All right, now let's go into the interview with Matt Ho. In this In his interview, Matt Ho describes the perception of the United States as a declining empire is influenced by several economic factors. These include the national debt, which has reached unprecedented levels, economic inequality, and the erosion of the manufacturing sector. The decline of once thriving industrial cities and the outsourcing of jobs contributes to this view. Additionally, the rise of other economic powerhouses such as China has shifted the global economic landscape. China's rapid growth in the technological advancements have led some to question the U.S.'s long-term economic dominance. Ho's assertion that the U.S. is losing its global influence warrants for further exploration. We can strained relations with allies, withdrawal from international agreements, for example, the Paris Agreement, and the inconsistent foreign policy decisions impact the U.S.'s standing in the world. The emergence of alternative models, for example, China's authoritarian capitalism, challenges the U.S. narrative on democracy and freedom. The perception of decline may vary across generations. Younger Americans who grew up in a post-Cold War era have witnessed shifts in global power dynamics. They may view the U.S. differently than older generations who experienced the height of American hegemony. Despite having the largest defense budget globally, the U.S. faces challenges in translating spending into effective military capabilities. The F-35 fighter jet program serves as a prime example. While costly, it has encountered technical issues and delays, raising questions about its value for money. The need for efficient defense systems becomes critical as the geopolitical tensions escalate. Ho's concern about wasteful spending resonates with policymakers and defense experts. Ho's emphasis on recruitment and the industrial base is critical. The U.S. military relies on a skilled workforce and a robust industrial capacity. However, maintaining a strong recruitment pipeline and sustaining domestic production and critical defense technologies are ongoing challenges. The decline of certain industries and the shift towards a service-based economy impact the U.S.'s ability to mobilize effectively during conflicts. And he talks about nuclear conflicts and war games. Ho's warning about war games leading to nuclear outcomes underscores the gravity of this situation. Escalation dynamics are complex, and even simulated scenarios can have unintended consequences. The delicate balance between deterrence and avoiding accidental escalation requires consistent vigilance and diplomatic efforts. Referencing historical events such as the Cuban Missile Crisis, he highlights the high stakes of nuclear tensions. The world has come close to catastrophe before, and lessons from the past must guide our actions today. Regarding the international relations and military bases, the U.S.'s plan for military bases in Finland raises questions about the European security and Russia's response. Geopolitically, this move signals a commitment to NATO allies, but also risks antagonizing Russia. Analyzing the broader implications for regional stability and the delicate balance between deterrence and provocation is essential. Drawing parallels to historical events can provide context. Just as the Cuban Missile Crisis had global ramifications, decisions regarding military bases today can shape the future of international relations. Let's go into Judge Napolitano's interview with Pepe Escobar. Escobar emphasizes that the Russian military operates with a strategic mindset. Unlike impulsive actions, they carefully assess the threats and the potential escalations. This approach reflects Russia's commitment to stability and security. The Russian military strategic planning involves a long-term perspective. They consider geopolitical implications, regional dynamics, and potential consequences before taking action. This contrasts with reactive approaches seen in some Western military decisions. When evaluating the possibility of U.S. bases in Finland, Russian leaders weigh the impact on regional security, neighboring countries, and their own defense posture. Russia aims to prevent security threats from encroaching on its borders. This concept contrasts with Western approach, which often involved expanding military presence. By prioritizing security and indivisibility, Russia seeks to maintain regional stability. Security and indivisibility means that the security of one nation cannot be isolated from that of its neighbors. Russia views any threat at its Russia views any threat near its border as a potential risk to its own security. This mindset influences their military strategy and diplomatic engagements. Russia's actions in Crimea and eastern Ukraine are driven by the belief that instability in these regions directly affects their security interests. Escobar suggests that Russia has a limited time frame to conclude the war on its terms. Within the next few months, Russia could achieve its objectives. However, challenges persist due to slow progress on the ground. Escobar's assessment considers both military and political factors. Russia's military gains in certain areas provide an opportunity for negotiation, but the conflict's complexities hinder swift resolution. Russia's recent troop withdrawal from the front line in Donbass indicates a willingness to engage in talks, but achieving a comprehensive settlement remains elusive. The conflict in Ukraine involves a delicate balance between military actions and diplomatic negotiations. Escobar's analysis underscores the need for nuanced understanding. Factors like territorial claims, historical context, and international involvement contribute to the complexity. This conflict isn't solely about military clashes. It's intertwined with historical grievances, identity politics, and great power interests. Escobar's perspective encourages policymakers to consider these multifaceted dynamics. The Minsk Agreement, aimed at resolving the conflict, required not only military de-escalation but also political compromises and trust-building measures. Escobar discusses the potential convergence of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the SCO, and BRICS. The SCO, led by Russia and China, focuses on security cooperation, while BRICS emphasizes economic collaboration. The SCO and BRICS represent different facets of Eurasian cooperation. The SCO addresses security challenges, including counterterrorism and regional stability. BRICS emphasizes economic development, trade, and investment. If these organizations converge, we might see joint efforts to address both security threats, such as Afghanistan's instability, and economic development, such as infrastructure projects. If these organizations converge, it could reshape security dynamics in Eurasia. Escobar prompts us to consider the impact of regional stability over power distribution and geopolitical alignments. A unified SCO-BRICS approach could challenge Russian dominance in global affairs. It might lead to alternative financial systems, joint military exercises, and coordinated responses to crises. The Belt and Road Initiative, BRI, supported by both SCO and BRICS members, exemplifies how economic connectivity can intersect with security interests. Escobar suggests that the West, particularly the U.S., may not fully grasp the significance of SCO and BRICS developments. Western policymakers need a better understanding of these shifts. Western narratives often focus on traditional alliances like NATO and EU, and overlook emerging partnerships. Escobar's observation highlights the need for informed analysis beyond conventional frameworks. Western media rarely covers SCO summits or BRICS meetings with the same intensity as NATO gatherings, perpetuating the awareness gap. As Eurasian partnerships evolve, the West must engage in informed dialogue rather than dismissive rhetoric. Escobar's perspective encourages a holistic approach to global affairs. Rather than viewing SCO and BRICS as adversarial, the West should engage constructively. Dialogue can lead to shared understanding, cooperative solutions, and mutual benefits. Joint initiatives on climate change, cybersecurity, and pandemic response could bridge gaps and foster collaboration across geopolitical divides. In conclusion, the interview with Pepe Escobar provides a deep dive into the current geopolitical situation, particularly focusing on Russia's strategic planning, the ongoing conflict in Ukraine, and the potential reorganization of the Eurasian security map. It highlights the need for better understanding of these issues, particularly by the West, to navigate the complex geopolitical landscape effectively. Now let's go on to the interview with Jaques Baud. Ambassador Freeman began by addressing the stability of Israel as a state following the events of October 7th. He noted that even before this date, Israel was grappling with internal political turmoil, primarily due to Prime Minister Netanyahu's attempts to undermine the judiciary to avoid corruption charges. This internal strife was exacerbated by the October 7th attacks, which initially united Israelis but soon revealed deep divisions within the government and society. Freeman highlighted the stark contrast between the extremist factions advocating for harsh measures against Palestinian and the military's criticism and of the government's lack of a coherent strategy. Freeman emphasizes that the October 7th attacks had a unifying effect on Israelis, rallying them behind a harsh policy towards the Palestinians. However, this unity was short lived as the government became increasingly divided. The extremists within the government pushed for severe actions against Palestinians, while the military criticized the lack of a clear strategy. This division was further complicated by the plight of hostages taken by Hamas, with families receiving little satisfaction from the government's effort. This displacement of thousands of Israelis and Lebanese due to skirmishes with Hezbollah added to the societal distresses, leading to a significant immigration and economic downturn. A significant portion of the interview was dedicated to discussing the ethical and humanitarian implications of Israel's policy towards Palestinians. Freeman criticized the Israeli government's actions, describing them as genocidal and fascist. He emphasized the moral degradation that has occurred, pointing out that Israel, once a victim of genocide, is now perpetuating similar atrocities against Palestinians. This shift, he argued, is a departure from the human and ethical traditions of Judaism. Freeman also touched upon the controversial statements made by Israeli officials, such as Itamar Ben-Gvir, who called for the summary execution of Palestinian prisoners. He condemned these statements as immoral and indicative of a broader trend of dehumanizing and brutality within Israeli policy. Freeman's critique extended to the broader societal acceptance of these policies. He argued that Israelis have been conditioned to view their actions as justified, largely through an education system that emphasizes the Holocaust and the unique suffering of the Jewish people. This has led to a situation where the victims of past atrocities are now the perpetrators, and their internal opposition to policies that Freeman described as fascist and genocidal. He highlighted the statements of officials like Itamar Ben-Gvir, who openly called for execution of Palestinian prisoners as evidence of this moral decline. The interview also explored the nature of U.S.-Israel relations. Freeman was unequivocal in his assessment that Israel is not a true ally of the United States, but rather a client state that often disregards American interests. He argued that the U.S. provides unconditional support to Israel without receiving any reciprocal commitment. This relationship, according to Freeman, has significant geopolitical costs, including strained relations with other Middle Eastern countries and a tarnished international reputation. Freeman questions the strategic value of the U.S.'s unwavering support of Israel, suggesting that it has become more of a liability than an asset. He pointed out that Israel's actions often led to confrontations that the U.S. must navigate, thereby complicating American foreign policy. Freeman elaborated on the nature of the U.S.-Israel relationship, describing it as one-sided and detrimental to American interests. He argued that Israel operates as a client state, benefiting the United States, benefiting from U.S.'s support without offering any reciprocal commitments. This dynamic, he suggests, has led to significant geopolitical costs for the U.S., including strained relations with other Middle Eastern countries or damaged international reputation. Freeman also criticized the Biden administration's effort to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia, describing him as unrealistic, driven by domestic political considerations rather than genuine strategic interests. Looking ahead, Freeman was pessimistic about the prospects for peace between Israel and Palestine under the current Israeli government. He describes the conflict as a war on the Palestinian people rather than a war against Hamas, emphasizing the systematic effort to deny Palestinians their right and self-determination. Freeman's analysis painted a bleak picture for the future, with continued violence and instability likely unless significant changes are made. Freeman's outlook on Israeli-Palestinian relations was bleak. He argued that the current Israeli government's policies are aimed at the systematic denial of Palestinian rights and self-determination. He described the conflict as a war on the Palestinian people rather than a war against Hamas, highlighting the long-standing efforts to dehumanize and displace Palestinians. Freeman suggests that Unless there are significant challenges to the policy, the future will likely see continued violence and instability. Ambassador Jaques Freeman interview provides a sobering analysis of the current state of affairs in the Middle East. His insights underscore the deep ethical and strategic challenges posed by Israel's policies and the complex dynamics of U.S.-Israel relations. As the situation continues to evolve, Freeman's perspective offer valuable guidance for policymakers and observers seeking to understand and address these critical issues. Now let's move on to Karen Kawiatoski's interview with the judge. In this interview, Kawiatoski provides a compelling analysis of the current state of the United States, arguing that it has transitioned from a republic to a failing empire. Her insights shed light on the profound challenges facing the nation, particularly in terms of its military expenditures, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and the erosion of democratic principles. Kawiatoski begins by highlighting the staggering scale of the U.S. military budget, which exceeds the combined spending of the next 9 countries. With over 1,000 military installations worldwide, the U.S. has invested heavily in maintaining its global presence. However, Kawiatoski argues that this investment has not translated into effective defense or intimidation of adversaries. Instead, it primarily benefits the defense industrial complex with little regard for the American people's safety or well-being. The U.S. military budget, currently at $886 billion annually, is a testament to the nation's prioritization of military might over critical areas such as healthcare and education. This immense expenditure supports a vast network of military bases and installations around the world, including recent expansions into Finland along the Russian border. Despite this, Kawiatoski points out that the U.S. military's effectiveness is in actual defense is questionable. The focus on maintaining a global military presence has not necessarily made the U.S. safer, but rather has enriched defense contractors and perpetuated a cycle of military spending. One of the most striking points Kawiatoski makes is about the autonomy of federal bureaucracies. She explains that these institutions, such as the Department of Defense and Homeland Security, operate on autopilot, resistant to change and largely disconnected from the needs of the American people. This bureaucratic inertia was evident during the Trump administration, where proposed changes were met with significant pushback. Kawiatoski suggests that these institutions prioritize their own objectives over national interests, contributing to the inefficiency of the government. Federal bureaucracies have become self-sustaining entities, often operating independently of the elected officials meant to oversee them. Kawiatoski describes how these institutions resist change, maintaining their own agendas regardless of the administration in power. This was particularly evident during Trump's presidency, where even the suggestion of change was met with resistance. The Department of Defense, for example, continues to prioritize its own growth and objectives over the border needs of the nations, leading to inefficiencies and lack of accountability. Kawiatoski is particularly critical of the current administration, questioning President Joe Biden's cognitive abilities and his capacity to lead. She argues that the president is not a true decision-maker, with power instead residing in the hands of unelected bureaucrats and influential donors. This disconnect between the presidency and the electorate determines the democratic process and exacerbates the nation's problems. The role of president, according to Kawiatoski, has been diminished to that of a figurehead, with real power lying in the hands of bureaucrats and donors. She expresses concern over President Biden's cognitive state, suggesting that he is not fully in control of the decisions being made. This situation is problematic as it disconnects the presidency from the electorate, undermining the democratic process. The influence of the unelected officials and wealthy donors further complicates this dynamic, as they often prioritize their own interests over those of the general public. The interview also delves into the U.S.'s foreign policy, particularly its involvement in Ukraine. Kawiatoski criticizes the administration's handling of the conflict, suggesting that decisions are made without a proper oversight or consideration of the consequences. She points out that the U.S. is effectively running the war in Ukraine, providing intelligence and targeting assistance, which escalates tensions with Russia. This approach, she argues, is dangerous and reflects a broader pattern of reckless military engagement. Kawiatoski highlights the U.S. involvement in Ukraine, an example of its reckless foreign policy. She argues that this that the U.S. is deeply involved in the conflict, providing not just financial aid but also intelligence and targeting assistance. This level of involvement escalates tensions with Russia and risks broader conflict. Kawiatoski criticizes the lack of oversight and strategic thinking in these decisions, suggesting that they are made without fully considering the potential consequences. This pattern of engagement is reflective of a broader issue in U.S. foreign policy, where military intervention is prioritized over diplomatic solutions. Kawiatoski and the interviewer Judge Napolitano discuss the corrupting influence of money in politics. They highlight how powerful lobbying groups such as AIPAC wield significant influence over Congress, often at the expense of the American public. This dynamic further erodes the principles of representative democracy as elected officials prioritize the interests of their donors over those of their constituents. The interview sheds light on the pervasive influence of money in American politics. Kawiatoski and Napolitano discuss how lobbying groups like AIPAC exert significant control over Congress. These groups use their financial power to influence legislation and policy decisions, often at the expense of the general public. This dynamic undermines the principles of representative democracy as elected officials become more accountable to their donors and to their constituents. The result is a political system that prioritizes the interests of the wealthy and the powerful over those of the ordinary citizens. Karen Kawiatoski's interview provides a sobering assessment of the state of American empire. Her critique of the military-industrial complex, bureaucratic inefficiencies, and the influence of money in politics underscores the urgent need for reform. As the U.S. grapples with these challenges, it must confront the realities of its imperial overreach and strive to restore democratic values upon which it was founded. Now let's go to Katie Halper's interview with Jody McIntyre. This interview with Jody McIntyre provides a compelling insight into the intersection of politics, disability rights, and the Palestinian struggle. McIntyre, a candidate for parliament under George Galloway's Workers' Party of Britain, shares his personal experience and political motivations, highlighting the challenges faced by marginalized communities and the importance of representation in politics. Jody McIntyre is a lifelong activist with a focus on Palestine, disability rights, and education. He has cerebral palsy and has lived in Palestine multiple times. His activism gained national attention in 2010 when he was dragged out of his wheelchair by police during protests against budget cuts and tuition hikes. McIntyre's candidacy in the Birmingham Yardley constituency is significant as he runs against Jesse Phelps, a member of the Labour Party Friends of Israel. McIntyre's campaign is driven by his opposition to Phillips' support for the Labour Friends of Israel, a pro-Israel lobby group within the Labour Party. He argues that Phillips' stance is incompatible with representing a constituency that is highly pro-Palestinian. McIntyre's campaign emphasizes the need for an MP who truly represents the views and concerns of their constituents, particularly regarding the Israeli occupation of Palestine. McIntyre's experiences in Palestine have profoundly shaped his political views. He recounts living with a Palestinian family in East Jerusalem who were forcibly evicted from their homes by Israeli police. This personal encounter with the harsh realities of Israeli occupation underscores his commitment to the Palestinian cause. McIntyre believes that witnessing such events firsthand is crucial to understanding the full extent of the occupation's impact. McIntyre's disability has also influenced his activism and political career. He shares the challenges he faced growing up, including discrimination and lack of accessibility. These experiences have fueled his determination to fight for the rights of marginalized communities. McIntyre's resilience in the face of adversity is a testament to his commitment to social justice and equality. Katie Halper's interview with Jody McIntyre sheds light on the critical issues of representation, disability rights, and Palestinian struggle. McIntyre's candidacy is a powerful statement against the status quo, advocating for a more inclusive and just political landscape. His personal experiences and unwavering dedication to activism make him a compelling figure in the fight for social justice. Now let's go to Kim Iverson's report on the two recent SCOTUS rulings. This report provides an in-depth look at two pivotal Supreme Court of United States rulings, Trump versus United States and Missouri versus Biden, now called Murphy versus Missouri. These cases address crucial issues of presidential immunity and the government censorship, respectively. Iverson's analysis offers a detailed examination of the decisions, their implications, and the broader context of American democracy and free speech. The Trump versus United States case centers on the extent of presidential immunity. The Supreme Court ruled in a 6-3 decision along ideological lines that a former president can be prosecuted for unofficial acts committed while in office. This decision clarifies that presidential immunity is not absolute. It does not cover unofficial acts, which can be subject to prosecution. Chief Justice John Roberts emphasized the need to balance the threat of constant criminal charges against the presidents with the necessity of holding them accountable for unofficial acts. The ruling aims to prevent the potential paralysis of the presidential decision-making due to fear of prosecution while ensuring that presidents are not above the law. Critics argue that this decision could lead to a chilling effect on future presidents who might be deterred from making bold decisions. Iverson points out that the ruling does not grant presidents carte blanche to commit crimes. It merely protects them from politically motivated prosecutions for actions taken in their official capacity. Iverson expresses concern about the potential for lawfare using legal means to attack the political opponents. She argues that while no politician should be above the law, the unique position of the presidency requires some level of immunity to function effectively. Iverson highlights the historical context of presidential actions that have gone unpunished, such as war crimes and other severe offenses, suggesting that the current ruling does not significantly change the status quo. Now going on to the Missouri versus Biden decision, now known as Murphy versus Missouri, which addresses allegations that the Biden administration pressured social media companies to censor certain information, particularly related to COVID-19 and election integrity. The Supreme Court's recent decision lifted an injunction that had previously prevented the government from contacting social media companies to urge censorship. The court ruled that the plaintiffs did not have standing, meaning they failed to demonstrate a direct injury traceable to the government's actions. This ruling has significant implications for free speech and government influence over social media. The decision does not address the merits of the case, whether the government's actions were unconstitutional, but rather focuses on the technicality of standing. Justice Thomas Alito and Gorsuch dissented, emphasizing the importance of protecting free speech from government overreach. Iverson criticizes the ruling, viewing it as a setback for free speech. She argues that the government's involvement in social media censorship is a serious threat to democratic principles. Iverson notes that the case is not over and that further evidence may be presented to establish standing and challenge the government's actions. She remains hopeful that the future cases will address the core issues of government censorship and uphold the First Amendment. Iverson's report on the SCOTUS rulings underscores the complex interplay between legal principles, political dynamics, and democratic values. The Trump versus United States case highlights the delicate balance between presidential accountability and the need to protect the office from politically motivated prosecutions. Meanwhile, the Murphy versus Missouri case raises critical questions about government influence over free speech and the role of social media in modern democracy. Lastly, let's go on to the new atlases with Brian Berletics, his new report, his new article on Ukraine's manpower problem. The conflict in Ukraine has reached a critical point, with Ukrainian forces struggling to maintain their defense against persistent Russian attacks. Brian Berletics' report highlights the significant challenges faced by Ukraine, including severe manpower shortages and heavy losses. The Western media, which previously maintained a narrative of Ukrainian stability, is now acknowledging the advances of Russian forces along the entire line of contact. This shift in narrative underscores the gravity of the situation and the increasing difficulty Ukraine faces in sustaining its defense efforts. Ukraine's manpower shortage is one of the most pressing issues highlighted in the report. The shortage has led to desperate measures such as transferring soldiers from one critical area to another, recruiting prisoners, and even considering the deployment of American military contractors to maintain U.S.-provided weapon systems. These actions reflect the dire circumstances and the lengths to which Ukraine is going to sustain its defense efforts. The new mobilization law aimed at recruiting more soldiers is seen as an act of desperation and is unlikely to change the situation on the battlefield significantly. Many Ukrainian men are fleeing the country to avoid conscription, further exacerbating the manpower crisis. Despite the introduction of advanced weapons like the Fab 3000 glide bomb, the Ukrainian military continues to struggle against Russian advances. The report highlights the limitations of the Patriot missile systems, which have proven insufficient due to the limited production of interceptors. The maintenance and repair of these advanced systems require skilled technicians, which Ukraine lacks. The Biden administration is considering allowing American contractors to deploy to Ukraine to help maintain these systems. However, this move could escalate the conflict and result in greater losses of equipment and personnel. The supply of ammunition and weaponry from the U.S. is also insufficient to meet Ukraine's needs, as production rates are too low to keep up with the demand. Berletic emphasizes Russia's ability to adapt and mass-produce weapon systems such as satellite-guided and laser-guided glide bombs, as well as the AI-guided kamikaze drones. This adaptability has given Russia a significant advantage in the conflict, challenging the Western narrative that Ukraine can effectively jam Russian glide bombs. Russia's ability to quickly adapt and produce new weapon systems in large quantities gives them a significant advantage over Ukraine, which is struggling to maintain its existing equipment. The effectiveness of Ukraine's strategy to deploy radio jammers to disrupt the guidance systems of Russian bombs remains uncertain. The report also touches on the broader geopolitical struggle, with the U.S. facing tough decisions on where to focus its efforts amidst a multipolar world and the unraveling of its global hegemony. The ongoing proxy war in Ukraine is part of a broader struggle for global hegemony. The U.S. is also involved in other conflicts around the world, such as the Middle East, which further strains its resources. The idea of maintaining hegemony in a changing multipolar world is increasingly seen as irrational and unsustainable. The authorization of Ukraine to strike Russian territory has had little strategic effect due to Russia's vast resources and infrastructure. In conclusion, Brian Berletic's report paints a grim picture for the current state of the conflict in Ukraine. The critical manpower shortages, challenges with new weaponry, and Russia's military adaptability all contribute to a situation where Ukraine is struggling to sustain its defense. The broader geopolitical implications further complicate the scenario, highlighting the complex and multifaceted nature of this ongoing conflict. The future of the conflict remains uncertain, with difficult decisions ahead for all parties involved. And that's it for Geopolitics Digest for today. If you like this, be sure to like it and share it. And be sure to check out all the original interviews in the links below.